Chanakya. Hello.
Hey Subhash,
How are you, buddy?
all good man, all good. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you for asking. Looks like it's just you and me.
Yep, and we have three more attendees right now.
Yeah, we have time. Yeah, we have ample amount of time.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Do you want
How's
to
it?
like do a quick run on the setup? If you're able to share your
Absolutely.
screen,
Yep. Yep.
your
Absolutely.
voice sounds perfect. That's not an issue. Let's just check your screen.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm projecting my screen now. One quick second.
Yep, got it.
You got it?
Yep.
All right. Perfect.
All right then.
Okay. So I'll put it on mute for a while,
Yeah,
maybe 5 minutes more, since we have what 14
15
minutes
minutes.
in hand. In hand.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, buddy.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Okay, done.
Yeah. Talk to you in a while. Yeah.
Yes, you do.
All right. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Doing fine. Thank you.
Welcome. It's a great morning today.
Indeed, it is.
But there in India right now, it is, I guess, it's around 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock, right?
Uh, I guess we have 10 minutes to half past
Half.
one,
Okay. 3 hours then the difference.
2.5 precisely.
Okay. Because India, it's a big land, so I guess they have different time zone in each area. Am I right?
Uh-huh.
Because when I was in India, I think in Goa it was like 4 hours the difference between Goa and Jeddah.
Yeah. Let's talk about it about our culture post this webinar, right?
Yeah, sure.
And
Go ahead.
for now, I guess we have three attendants.
Okay.
Uh,
Great.
let's wait for 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
I'll be on mute, and you have my number. Should there be anything, you can ring me out on my phone, and we'll talk then.
Sure.
I'll
Okay.
be on mute and away for 5 minutes.
Right. Same here. All right.
Hi, Ahmed.
Hi, Subhash.
Yeah, I see that the count is increasing, and we still have 5 minutes
Yeah.
left off to start. Maybe I'll give you the mic to introduce yourself to the audience and about your engagement with this webinar, so that we know the reason for the gathering, and I'll take it from there.
All right. Sure.
Yeah. So the mic
All
is
right.
all yours to start.
Okay. Let's start. Hi, everyone. I would like to thank you for attending today's session for Microsoft Azure. I would like to introduce myself for the people who don't know me. I am Ahmed Al Nahari from Time Evolution Company. I'm the business development manager at Time Evolution. At Time Evolution, what we are doing, we are a system integrator company that we are specialized on the IT infrastructure. Either it is on-premise or it is on cloud. We would like to hear from your side after the session. If you have any question, please just write it down in the chat, and then we're gonna answer you. Mr. Shabash, if you I would like to hand over the mic to Mr. Shabash. Mr. Shabash? Mr.
Yes,
Shabash?
Ahmed. Thank
Yeah.
you very much for the quick introduction of yourself and the engagement for the day and about your company.
Yeah.
hmm I
Thanks.
still see that we have people still coming in, so let's wait for a few more minutes.
People exciting today about it.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
hmm Chanakya, maybe in another 3 minutes,
Right.
we will kick off,
All right.
as we want to value and respect the time of the people who have joined in already.
Definitely, sure.
hmm All right, guys, I think we should commence as we have handful amount of all audience already in the room. So let's respect the number of people who have already joined in, and I'm sure there will be many more participants joining as we progress. So first thing first, guys, good morning. Thank you for coming in today. My name is Subhash Sharma. I'm the speaker for the day. We will be talking about the cloud adoption journey, what Microsoft Azure offerings are all about. We will be touching base on the Azure migration, site recovery, and the platform as service. Also, we will touch base on business continuity plan with disaster recovery. So we got a lot of things to cover, and I can only think, and to my understanding, I will try and do justice to cover all of them within the stipulated time frame. In the meanwhile, if any of you want to know more about the topic that we will be covering or have any questions in the mind, can just put it on the chat box and I'll be happy to answer them at the end of this session. At the same time, if any of the topic or the deck has interested you and you want to gain more deep dive insight or any technical engagement for the topic that we're going to cover, I request all your suggestions to be parked on the chat box or to our email, and I'll be happy to connect and take it from there. So with that being said, let's progress and see what the day has to offer, and we're going to touch base on all the topic that you see on the deck now. We all know the reason for the gathering today is to talk about Microsoft Azure. And why are we talking about Microsoft Azure now? Is of the vital need. The reason we are talking about Microsoft Azure today because the world has changed the way technology has been used from a conventional method to the trending future. When I say to the trending future, the trend of the solution, the services has changed drastically. We need to adopt the modern workplace in order to achieve the business goal and in order to achieve the business need as well, while comforting the user and the ecosystem of our environment at the same time. When we talk about Microsoft Azure, we all know Microsoft Azure is a cloud-based solution that offers you compute, storage, network, and other services over the internet that a customer or a business can use. Okay. When we talk about cloud solutions, we need to consider various factors that come into our mind before we migrate. And that is what we're going to cover them all face by face, and we'll see what is the best thing that you can achieve with Microsoft Azure. Azure, as I mentioned earlier, offers infrastructure as service, various types of cloud, maybe platform as service, software as service. But then why do you need Azure Cloud? The reason you need the Azure Cloud because there is a need of the business to eliminate uh, the on-prem cost that is purely capital expenditure model. When I talk about capital expenditure model, let me put it this way. If you were to procure a server and if you were to publish an app or a service that is very critical for your business, the first thing that you do is you will identify a vendor and you will work on the compute, that is the amount of memory or the space or the the other aspects of the hardware, yeah, that is required for that application to publish. So when you talk about such traditional method of procuring an asset and installing an app for the business, you're actually investing good amount of time. You're investing efforts that could be measured over the period of time as you use the resources, because on an on-prem environment it is purely a capital that is invested first, all right? To measure the ROI, that's your return on investment, it's kind of a daunting task because an asset procured today will be depreciated down the line, and you may have return only if you have fully utilized the resource. However, with Azure, it is different. With the Azure cloud, it's purely consumption-based model. You pay only for what you use. All right, you have the full discretion to power on the server when you need it, power off when you do not need it, save more money when the resources are not utilized. With Azure, you save a good amount of money on the pocket for various reasons. The first thing first, as I mentioned earlier, it is purely a consumption-based model. You pay for what you will be using, and there are other several benefits like reserve instance, Azure hybrid benefit. When I talk about reserve instance, if I could explain that in layman language, I'm telling to Mr. Microsoft that look, my application will only need 10 gig of RAM, and that should suffice the workload that I want to put onto the machine. Knowing the fact that I'm paying 100 USD in a pay as you go model for the same compute, if I tell Mr. Microsoft to reserve the hardware for the application, I can leverage more 30 to 35% discount if I reserve the instance. There's a subset, maybe you can reserve the instance for a year or 3 and gain some more discount on your compute. At the same time, all right, we all know the ecosystem of Microsoft is pretty user friendly and it works seamlessly with other solutions by the same giant, that's Microsoft. So with the Azure hybrid benefit, you have the leverage to save on your licensing cost. For example, today you have procured a server license with software assurance, and down the line, maybe 6 months or a year, you think of moving over to the cloud. A thought will come to mind that you have already invested onto the licensing, and you know how you will plan to move it over to the cloud. Well, the beauty of the AHB is that you can still use your existing on-prem licenses, redeem it over the cloud, and ensure that you gain more discount. So that's the beauty of the Azure hybrid benefit, along with the consumption-based pricing tier that can only ensure that you are at the win situation. Azure is the best destination for Windows Server and the SQL Server. As I mentioned earlier, the ecosystem of the Microsoft is pretty simple and it works hand in hand with other applications as well. So if I could give you an example right now, why it has been said that it is the best destination for the Windows workload. First thing, the AHP is in place. You have the power to save money onto the workload that you want to move it over to the cloud. The second thing is that for a solution that is an on-prem environment, maybe for your SQL database, okay, or maybe your virtual machine, or maybe a server itself, we have various inbuilt solutions that can take care of your workload and can migrate them easily. With Azure Cloud solution, we have a lot of inbuilt tools that can help you to assess your environment. And there's a reason and there's a need for the migration today for many good reasons. First thing first, all right, the capital expenditure that we all have been doing on a traditional environment has changed to an operational based expenditure model. The second part is the responsibility of maintaining the on-prem data center or the infrastructure is kind of a tedious and a daunting task. There are a lot of overheads involved. There is security that someone has to worry about. But over the cloud, it's all managed by Microsoft. For you, for the customer community, all they have to worry about is their own efficiency and let Microsoft take care of the underlying infrastructure to be managed in terms of compute, fault tolerance, security, and the availability of the resources. It is pretty simple when you are at the point that you want to actually think of migrating a resource using the inbuilt assessment tools. You are free to migrate your SQL database seamlessly using platform as service, or maybe someone who is actually geek and want to have full control over the database itself or the app or the integration, they can actually have the infrastructure as service in place. Your I'm so sorry, your Windows machines can be moved seamlessly. You have your Linux based environment that can have the assessment done on-prem, and then the checklist can actually tell you whether the environment is ready and healthy to be moved now. In a nutshell, the migration does the job for you. All right. You don't have to worry about who will do the activity on your behalf. When I say your behalf, I mean the customer behalf. Or when we talk about this migration, all right, I have a purely vision for my customer community who wants to know how they can leverage the services that has been offered by Microsoft and who will be responsible for this engagement of the cloud adoption journey. The partners, the strategists, the consultant who are joining today are the best person who will do the handholding for you. And how the lift and shift method, if I could just talk about the servers that are on on-prem environment that needs to be migrated. Yeah, you can actually sign up for the account, subscribe for the licenses. When I say subscription for the license, I mean, maybe you can have uh, a DevOps environment at the first place to test how your workloads will be behaving or the app compatibility over the cloud. So there are things that needs to be considered. Maybe your VMs can be moved directly your Linux servers or the VDI environment. When I talk about VDI, I mean the Citrix environment. I mean the VMware solution. That can be moved over. At the same time, it is not only limited for your servers or the applications, your database. Also, you can integrate the hybrid environment itself. The assessment of the environment with the Azure migration tool is the best thing that you could have. That actually take care of all your worries so that you can just only focus on your efficiency. The thin line to understand here is the engagement that you do with the business has to be defined nicely. When I say the engagement of the business has to be the nicely, I purely mean, the engagement with the customer to know the workload. All right. Once the workload has been identified, a proper design has to be proposed to ensure the workload that you want to shift it over to the cloud may require infrastructure as service or may require platform as service, but the goal of moving the workload to the cloud could be achieved. There are reasons that I want to talk about, maybe a use case, before we talk about platform as service or an app-based environment, how that can be moved. Let me just put it this way, for someone, who is pretty keen to move into the cloud and wants to have a satisfaction onto his workload, that goal of the business can certainly be achieved. The first thing that you do is plan the environment that has to be moved. Once it has been identified that your workloads are ready to move, you can enroll for a development account, maybe your user acceptance test environment, kind of a DevOps. Do the due diligence and do the testing of your app over the Azure Cloud, Platform as Service, or Infrastructure as Service. And once you have the solution tested, then you can move it onto the production environment. That's the best practice somebody can actually adopt today if they are really keen to move the workload over the Azure cloud. What I have on my deck now is the app service plan pricing tiers. That's purely the part of platform as service. Let me talk about a use case. If a developer or a website design company want to actually publish a website over the Azure cloud, they do not need to worry about the underlying infrastructure or to identify the best vendor or the VPNs, that's a virtual private service, or any hosting solution. In a blink of an eye, an account can be created over the cloud. Once you have the subscription in place, you can directly sign on for the app service plan with the help of graphical user interface. In a blink of eye, when you do next, 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 your app is published over the cloud. What you need to worry about, when I say worry, no, it's not a worry, but then the only thing that you need to understand when it comes to selection of the right plan and the tier is the table which is actually available over the Microsoft Docs as a reference guide that will talk about the availability of the plan, that will also talk about the hybrid connectivity and the compute that you will be selecting. Mind you guys, the standard and the basic dedicated environment for testing is the only plan for now that will give you the dedicated resources for somebody who wants to have a fully, uh, you know, when I say fully, when I only mean, an app hosted over to the server wherein they are the complete owner of that compute. There are two aspects to the story, all right? With cloud, we know that it's purely a consumption-based model and you're going to pay only for what you will be using, okay? There is one thing that I want to lay emphasis. We all are aware of the fact that there are days where there are an online sale conducted by the giants, and well, their infrastructure is merely not set up in a day or two. All right, you have such scaling, running behind the engine doing the job of adding more servers to the hosting platform. What I mean here is purely scaling up and scaling out. Scaling up and scaling out with the Azure App Services plan means you are adding more compute to your dedicated instance, that is scale up. When you add up more instance to back your existing instance, all right, that's the horizontal scale. You're adding more virtual machine to your existing plan to only ensure that your app server will take the load, take the hit in an unprecedented time. When I say unprecedented time, I mean only the time when you know that your workload needs to be balanced. In case there is an event and you expect high number of traffic, okay, with the help of elasticity, you don't have to worry about, reducing down the compute to save money. That is done by the app service plan automatically for you. So that's the beauty of scaling up and scaling out with the Azure platform as service. You just have to worry about your app environment itself. You don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. With the Azure Logic apps, the only thing that I could relate here for as a good example is, if I were to run a task scheduler, you know, doing a job for me of reporting and environment health of my servers, it comes from the native environment, guys. We all know on an on-prem environment, I have a number of servers, and if I need to know a health of a server, I could create a script, add it to the task scheduler, and let it run on a time, and let it give me the report. That's where the Logic app could be related. It is a cloud service used to schedule, automate, and orchestrate task, business process, and workflow that helps the developer, to create such logics that can actually automate your own workflow, that reduce your time, increase your efficiency, and ensure that the business goals are achieved without investing hours and hours and hours and hours on the tedious tasks of automation. When we talk about Azure migration and modernization scenarios, there are pretty simple four keys to it that one has to identify once the engagement is done right. They are nothing but rehost, refactor, re-architect. What are they? Rehost, simply lift and shift, that we'll talk about in detail, means I'm picking up a server from an on-prem environment, putting it over to the cloud. Simple lift and shift migration done. Refactor is an area that we consider that maybe that app could be legacy for the business, or something has been retiring in your environment and need to be worried about before we move it onto the cloud. Software as service, if I can give you a good example about software as service at this point, I can only relate it to the Exchange Online plan or the Office 365 solutions hosted over the cloud. That's the best thing and the future of the applications. When I say the future of the application, because software as service has taken away all the wariness of an administrator and the overheads that are been invested in maintaining the on-prem Exchange Server account. Imagine, right, if you have more than 1,000 users on an on-prem environment and maintaining the database, maintaining the data availability group, that's where your mailbox is housed in a cluster, highly available environment. So with software as service, everything is hosted over the cloud. The only thing that you need to manage is the policies and the administrative. You don't have to worry about the availability of the mailboxes. That's the beauty of the software as service. The common migration modernization projects, as we spoke about it, like your virtual machines, your file servers, or the Windows server specifically, or your Linux-based machine, or maybe the ERP solutions like your SAP HANA, right? All workloads have a solution over the cloud that can be migrated seamlessly without a worry. The migration behavior is something that I want to talk about now. When I say migration behavior, what I mean by the migration behavior in a layman language to me is nothing but an engagement that actually design a right solution. For somebody, when I talk about application migration using the Azure infrastructure as service, I have this Azure Site Recovery doing the backup part for me. When I say doing the backup part for me, I mean, you know, it is ensuring the availability of my business defined by the goal, by the compliance. I can have an app migrate over to the cloud using platform as service, or I can spin it up over to the infrastructure as service using a virtual machine. At the same time, I can have the app service and the Azure database SQL managed instance rolled out over the cloud in a blink on an eye. Guys, here we need to just talk about the managed instance and the shared responsibility model. When we talk about the shared responsibility model, we all know that solutions are been offered by Microsoft, but then there is a responsibility from the user and the business perspective as well that has to be in place. For Microsoft, in an infrastructure as service environment, they are responsible for fault tolerance. They are responsible for the management of the hardware. They're responsible for the management of pushing the updates onto the machine. However, when it comes to the platform as service, from a user community, your scope of work, or rather, I would say your scope of responsibility is only at the application layer and the data access. All the insight when it comes to the nitty-gritty of the management in an infrastructure as service and the platform as service, it's all defined in the shared responsibility model. which is available over the Microsoft Docs when it comes to the migration journey. When we talk about migration, we only talk about the highly available environment over the cloud. We also talk about the security. When I talk about the security, the length and breadth, the defense and depth of the security, all the compliance measure. We also talk about the scalability of the team, the size, the workload, and the compliance policies defined by the stakeholders for the business to be compliant. Now, at this point of the journey, all right, when we know that the cloud is highly available, scalable, fault tolerant, but how these goals are met? If, for an example, I have a file server on an on-prem facility, I backed it over to the cloud. Is that VM highly available to the business in the event of any failure on an on-prem environment? Maybe, may not be. All right. That also depends on the solution that was advised to the customer. So let us see as we progress what is the right method when it comes to adopting the cloud migration tools and the journey. The choice of tools, as I mentioned, are readily available over the portal itself. You assess your environment, you perform the migration, do the optimization to ensure your business goals are met. But then how these things will be achieved? Using the Azure Migrate tool, as I mentioned earlier, that's your best friend when it comes to doing the handholding of the business to migrate the workload over to the cloud. The tool itself will assess the environment. Once the assessment is done, it will report you whether your existing environment needs some optimization or it's readily available to move. Then you come to a solution of selection. When I say the solution of selection is only by all means whether you will be landing up all your workloads in an infrastructure as model or the platform as service model. Worry then about the shared responsibility model as well. For somebody who wants to have the full control over the workload, I'm sure they would have the infrastructure as service solution picked up over the cloud. We're not talking about moving the entire workload all in one go over to the Azure cloud. You have your DevOps subscription for testing your workload once you have a satisfactory over the compatibility or the behavior of the app or the environment working in the cloud. Because over the cloud, forecasting is kind of a calculative task to understand how the workload will be calculated. When I say how the workload will be calculated, I just give you a quick example. When we speak about the consumption-based model, we know that you will be only paying when you are using the service. Okay, how will you forecast that budget when you have this operational expenditure in place? Well, with an inbuilt tool like Azure Cost and Management and in the Azure Advisor, this both the tools actually help you optimize the environment. From a native environment like Active Directory, we all know that the directory service job is to save the user account, safeguard all the assets stored in the directory by applying all the group policies. It comes from an hierarchical vision to me right now. For example, if I need to understand the amount of resources added to the HR group, or if someone wants to understand how my marketing team who is performing an ad hoc task that requires additional compute, I can have a different billing subscription altogether for that particular task. By isolating this different workloads from a production environment to another subscription, it gives me a leverage to segregate the billing and understand which department, which resource, or what was the activity that has consumed your bill. And then you do your due diligence to ensure that in the event of such activity, what is the right method to approach the goal and ensure that the job is done. Summarizing about the cloud migration strategies, guys, uh, as I mentioned earlier, all right, when you think about redeploying as is to cloud, you are only doing the lift and shift. Doing so is backed by your infrastructure as service. When you're worrying about the refactor strategy, all it takes is the containers, and they are nothing but the platform as service containers. As you know, guys, it is just a module, that has some codes run onto it, and that does the job for you. You don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, platform as service is purely managed by Microsoft, and the software as service environment is an environment where your softwares are hosted. It is of a vital understanding when it comes to the migration strategies. Rebuilding the environment from the scratch can save you from all the migration hassle, but then at this point of the story, and I'm sure uh, many of you may think about building the environment from the scratch, but many of you will also worry about how your existing workload needs to be migrated. That's all where your inbuilt strategies come into the picture and does the handling for you to ensure your workload is migrated seamlessly. Key resources and investments, what are they? Migration approach, tools, offers, spike partners, training. That is where this agenda of our gathering comes into picture. When we have a migration approach, we know that the Azure inbuilt migration tools cover our back. We have the offers available from Microsoft to test our workloads. We have the migration partners doing the handling, and we have ample amount of training to be done for a dedicated solution that actually gives you an insight of how, knows, and all the questions before you move your workload, before you adopt the cloud. The azure.com/migration talks about some of the migration approach and the best practice that the business can adopt. A detailed walkthrough of different migration scenarios is readily available over the link at aka.ms/contoso-migration. Somebody who is pretty keen on understanding the different workload and the migration scenario can directly connect onto the link and gain some more insight about the deep dive of the workload. The best practice is always, before you think about migrating to the cloud, is engaging with the customer, or the best engagement with the workload. When I say the best engagement with the workload, all I mean by all words is you need to understand what workload you're trying to migrate it over to the cloud. When I say you need to understand what workload you're trying to migrate over to the cloud, I mean, for an example, if I were to migrate a file server over to the cloud, I can certainly spin up a VM. At the same time, I have the Azure file share storage. I mean, that's the storage account doing the job for the network file share. Yeah, if I do not question at the right engagement when it comes to provisioning the storage account, I may land a solution that is costly to the customer. When I say costly to the customer, okay, since I've spoken about the storage account, let me just tell you one thing real quick. All right, when you have a storage account in the Azure cloud, or when you have a storage migration to be done, it is pretty important that we question about the workload. For somebody, okay, for somebody who was just migrating it over to the cloud, and will not be accessing the data share frequently. When I say data share, I mean the files over the server, and you accidentally selected the blob storage with the hot tier, there is likely to be, uh, there is likely that the customer may end up paying more than he anticipated because he's not using the data frequently that is housed over to the Azure cloud. And if you have the engagement with an incomplete information, you may land up by selecting a solution which is not good for that approach or for that engagement. So this is where the understanding of the storage gives you a pretty much comfort to offer the right solution. Once you have this engagement, once you have the engagement that the customer will frequently access the data. All right, I know that if the customer is frequently accessing the data, I will certainly position the blob storage account over the cloud, and then I'll go to the pricing calculator. The pricing calculator will tell me if I were to provision a 20 terabyte frequently access over the Azure cloud, the cost can be given at hand. Once the cost is handy, you can do the forecast by understanding the total cost of ownership when you have a solution to be migrated over the cloud. Total cost of ownership is a calculator that gives you a pretty much insight about the budget, and also talks about how you can optimize or what are your real pain points when it comes to the calculation of the real estate on an on-prem environment, the power consumption, all the workloads uh, that needs an overhead. So that's when I really want to lay emphasis when it comes to migrating a workload or selecting a solution. The first thing that we always need to have in place is the engagement done right. Let somebody, an expert at hand or an expert over the call, do the handholding. And once you have this in place, you have the Azure pricing calculator giving you the price of the workload to be migrated. Guys, you also know that the Azure hybrid benefit, the reserve instance, and the pay-as-you-go model can certainly have a win situation. That's where you also think about the strategy. Maybe you're re-architecting the environment, or maybe you're just applying for, when I say applying, I mean, moving it over to the cloud or using software as service or the infrastructure as service. With all this use case, I can say this with an affirmation that moving onto the cloud, when you have the Azure hybrid benefit reserve instance in place, you have a win situation. The customer with this use case will certainly save more than 30 to 35%. This is from my experience when you have the workload migrated over to the cloud to the fullest capacity in an optimized environment. Once the workload are migrated, all right, we all know we have a lot of inbuilt tools like Azure Advisor, cost and management, and the advisory from the network watcher and whatnot. Gives you pretty much the insight of the environment. All right. So the governance, the security, the resilience, the monitoring, and the automation of the applications or the logic apps or the workloads, it's done pretty easily, efficiently, and it's effective to have all this in place. When I say it's effective to have all this place, and that is the only time when you have the best governance in place and the security. Resiliency, as you know, it is it is purely, the highly availability and the protection of VMs, apps, and data in an environment can give you uh, the 99.9% SLA. That also depends uh, the solution that you have asked for. Maybe if I could just give you an example, the premium disk when it comes to the storage account or the managed disk. The premium disks are backed with 99.99% SLA that ensures that the disk will be highly available. Assessing your environment with Azure Migration, like I said, if you have the virtualization solution like the VMware or your Citrix environment. We have the VMware assessment tools for your VMware workloads. We also have tools for the Windows and the Linux assessment. The free built-in service, as I mentioned earlier, is the best friend of yours when it comes to migrating the workload over to the Azure cloud. Guys, the data center, okay, which is available in 54 regions now, is at the closest proximity of our end user, okay, which is spanned across 184 plus countries, if I remember the number right as of today. Okay, it is pretty much important when it comes to the selection of the data center. For an example, all right, I'm putting up a server in an UAE North, okay, and my customer base in US. I also need to understand by all means where is my customer base and how much it will be costing for somebody powering the resources over the cloud from a different region, and the latency or the connectivity. Let's not talk about the connectivity as of now. The first thing when it comes to positioning of the data center to the closest proximity of a user, what comes to my mind is the latency. The latency is nothing but a delay that actually happens in the event of when a connection is established from a source to a destination. You have the Azure latency test, maybe the Azure speed test can be done when selecting the right data center. So once that is selected, guys, once that is selected, that is where the other aspects of security, maybe the network or the availability of the resources comes to the thought or comes to our mind for consideration. When I have known for the fact that UAE North is a good closest reach for my customer base who's in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. Okay, for that fact. The second thing that worry my mind is the availability of my own solution. If I could just talk about a quick example. Let me give you an example of a file server right away. My file server is a standalone server right in my environment. My server goes down for many good reasons. Oh, that shouldn't be the case to begin with, but for an hypothetical situation, my server goes down. Do I have a backup? Maybe yes. Where is the backup? Maybe over the cloud on an on-prem environment. That's your private cloud on an Hyper-V or a VMware. Or maybe it is at the next door of my building, which is physically situated. Guys, uh, creating a backup, when I say backup, it's not backing about your file, it is actually backing about the workloads. If you have such a disaster recovery plan on an on-prem environment, you are investing more money to ensure your business is available. For a business who can afford to have some amount of downtime when it comes to the recovery point objective, you know, that's the RPO. Uh, you can have the active passive DR solution. But again, to my thought, why would I actually invest on an on-prem environment today when we have the Azure cloud doing the job for me? The Azure Site Recovery does the job for you that ensure there is a zero app data loss, nearing zero downtime. You have a drill based environment. When I say a drill based environment, I mean you can actually do a failover test for a production or just a drill to ensure that the configuration that you have done for an on-prem environment in an event of a failure that has to be spent over the cloud is good to use. When it comes to the highly available environment in Azure Cloud, we spoke about, by giving an example, we spoke about the highly availability of a disk that is in a storage account as a premium disk that ensure the highly availability with the SLA of 99.9%. We all know what Azure availability set is. We all know what Azure availability zone is all about. Availability zone is nothing but adding up one or more data center, maybe three. A ratio of 1:3. That once one copy of your workload is moved over to the other cloud, that gives you the ratio of 1:3, which is again an independent data center with compute, storage, and power. In the event of failure, another DC or a region, which is connected with a high fiber link and close to 300 miles, can actually ensure that the availability of the workload is in place. That's purely the availability zone. When I talk about the availability set, I only purely talk about the fault tolerance and the update domains. Availability set by all means ensure that your resources are protected in the event of a fault tolerance within the data center. As I mentioned earlier, you have 54 regions span across 184 countries as of today that ensure that the data center is hosted to the closest proximity of the user, that by all means gives the comfort of to the user to ensure that they have the least amount of latency when their services are published over to the cloud. Disaster recovery by all means is the best uh, solution that you could give it to your business today with Azure Cloud. When I say you can give it as a best solution to your business, because we all know investing on an on-prem environment is a capital expenditure method. When I say capital expenditure method, you are investing money first. There is no ROI in place as of now to measure your capital expenditure. I'm sure there is. However, putting it up on a budget to ensure that your business will be available only for the fact you optimize the resources to the fullest capacity. With the Azure cloud, with the Azure Site Recovery in place, all right, the migration of the workload and the disaster recovery can be done seamlessly. You're still not paying for the recovery vault proactively. You're only provisioning the resources. At this point of the story, the most important thing to understand here is when we talk about migrating the workload to the cloud using the Azure Site Recovery, we need to know the important aspect when it comes to failing back from a cloud environment to the on-prem environment over to the physical box. That's not allowed. When I say that's not allowed, you just cannot fail back from the cloud environment to the physical on-prem environment onto the physical server. You can fail back onto the Hyper-V or the VMware solution. The Azure to Azure backup is allowed. The Azure to Azure recovery is allowed. The recovery capabilities, if I could give you my best example. Okay, when I say recovery or key capabilities, this is from a tested experience. I had an on-prem environment, failed over to the cloud. The amount of time it took me for a server to be spun for a workload, maybe, if I remember, yeah, that was a file server. Yeah. So I had this file server on my on-prem environment configured, replicated onto my Azure cloud. It only took me 10 minutes. Yes, it only took me 10 minutes to spun the server over the cloud. Mind you guys, since it was in an test environment, I could afford the amount of data loss. For somebody who is into an mission critical workload, he just cannot afford downtime. Yeah, the disaster recovery is available uh, only when you have the active environment in place. When I say the active environment in place, there are a lot of key consideration. As I mentioned earlier, it is only to the business goal. If somebody wants to have, in an event of failure on an on-prem environment, the business by no means should not be impacted. I could have the primary region, that is a set of service spun over the cloud that are running parallelly. And once there is a failure, the workloads are still being managed over to the cloud. Using this recovery practice, you can decide when you want to fail over application. You can restore application to primary data center, and the cycle goes on. The architect that I have on the screen now talks about the highly available environment in an active mode for a web-based application using the microservices. Uh, its tier are fragmented from the web perspective, from the business perspective, and from the data perspective, kind of an n-tier application environment. What I want to cover here is to give you an insight about how the highly available environment looks like. Assuming that we have an on-prem environment on the ground and that is connected to the primary region, in the event of a failure of a web tier on an on-prem, I still have my primary region doing the job for me, publishing my apps. Okay. It is again an hypothetical situation. For any good reason, the web tier goes down onto the primary region as well. I still have the workload replicated, the asynchronous replication, all right, which is replicating the workload onto the secondary region, which is, for an example, UAE North again. I have the primary hosted onto the UAE North. If that region, UAE Central, has the disaster recovery activated for that particular region, I can still have my secondary region spun up and ensure that the availability of my business is real time, maybe. Or if the business, again, in a hybrid environment, when I say hybrid environment, I mean your workload are over to the cloud, your workload are toward the uh, physical environment, your business will attain the 100% availability only if you have the active environment in place. But for some workload, who can afford a minimal amount of downtime. So, guys, when we talk about the business continuity plan and the disaster recovery, all right, one thing is for sure that we are achieving the business goal by ensuring that we have the right amount of solution. When I say the right amount of solution, I only by all means that we have provision the availability of our resources with all disciplinary guidelines defined by the business. In an active environment, you have your on-prem environment up and running. You have your primary region actively working with the physical side. At the same time, you have the backup provision that they are. Guys, there's a cost implication again. All right. Quality comes with price. So there is a cost implication again for somebody who can afford some amount of downtime onto that workload. Can also think about failing back to the DR side with the active passive environment. When I say active passive environment, I mean, if you are failing back on an on-prem environment and you just have the vault, that's your Azure Site Recovery Vault backed up the on-prem workload with the minimum amount of downtime, the services can still be up and running. The only thing that need to worry about is we'll have to spend the service manually, and you'll be only paying for the resources that are spent during the event of failure. Once you fail back onto the on-prem environment, you can go ahead and stop the services that are active onto the DR region and save on your cost implications. So, in a nutshell, the highly available environment is purely to the business workload where your business is running on a mission critical applications, maybe in the ERP or maybe the exchange services, or maybe your applications that are related to the monetary exchange and whatnot. For an environment where you have your non-critical workload to be secured, you can surely have the backup in place that can do the backup of your file folders and maybe for the SAP HANA as well. So guys, with this, I actually come to an end where we spoke about the disaster recovery by all means, uh, you know, with the goal to ensure the availability of the business that has matched the expectation of the finance as well. When I say that has matched the expectation of the finance, it's all by all means understanding the workload environment, understanding the need and the tool that needs to be used when it comes to selecting the right solution, maybe the infrastructure as service, maybe the platform as service, or maybe the software as service. At the same time, we have now known what a hybrid environment looks like when it comes to the availability of the resources uh, in a highly scalable environment, in an active mode, and in an environment where you have solutions spun up in an active passive environment. So with this, guys, I would like to conclude this session today. I hope we have done the justice by covering all the important aspects within the stipulated time frame. If there are any questions, please park it to the chat box now, and I'll be happy to answer all of them. And if any of the topic has interested, and if any of you want to have further engagement for a quick round of technical deep dive on the configuration of the ASR or the backup for that fact, or understanding the bill of material or the total cost of ownership, I'll be happy to answer all your questions now. Back to Amit and Chanakya. Amit, back to you. If you have any questions or concerns, please voice them now.
First of
Good
all,
luck.
I would like to thank all the audience for attending today. I have wrote down my email and my contact number in the chat box. I would be happy actually to hear from the audience if they do have any inquiries in Saudi or any assistance they need. I will be very happy to answer them and support them.
I'm going to toggle back onto my screen if anyone wants to capture the information out of that deck. Please do so. All right, so with this, we conclude now. All your questions are welcome. Thank you guys for coming in today, and thank you for all your patience. All right,
Thank you,
I sign
Subhash,
off.
for the wonderful session. Thank you.
So, thank you, Baba.